So last but not least, we have Margaret Mattix. So Margaret graduated in chemical engineering from UVA and went on to get an MBA at WashU. She started her career at Monsanto in manufacturing and engineering. And then there was a joint venture established between Monsanto and Exxon, and she ended up part of that. And as that joint venture was ultimately acquired fully by ExxonMobil, she moved from Monsanto to ExxonMobil. And there she continued on, ended up as vice president for marketing, and really has accomplished some really amazing things through her career and has been a really strong mentor and advocate for women. So we're so happy to have her here with us today. Margaret.
Okay, it's just me between now and a break and to stretch your legs, so I'm going to try to keep you interested. Thanks for the introduction. I have a couple of pages that have a lot of pictures on it because it's the easiest way to kind of whip through some background. So I grew up in Bermuda, and I was the oldest of 7 children. We had a great British education. You can see us there in our little British school uniforms with the ties. My father, when I was the oldest of 7, my dad was a NASA pioneer, and really from very early years, that love of technology, the curiosity. I was telling some people at a break, I hope you've all seen the movie Hidden Figures. I think it's one of the best movies that was a story that needed to be told, but I grew up hearing about those ladies. And Bermuda actually got the second computer after the one in the movie in Virginia. And I was just a little girl, and my dad took me out of school so that I could be there when it started up for the first time. And at the time, of course, they had to build a whole nother building at the NASA tracking station to fit this computer in it. But even though they became believers in the computer, the ladies were not the only ones running calculations. My father was as well. I was an engineer here, and I got home for a break. And my poor mom, her entire dining room table was covered with my dad trying to solve equations. He's like, Margaret Mary, how are your Laplace transforms? I'm like, oh God, I studied for the test and then forgot it. But NASA at the time used a fudge factor, just kind of like a leap year, for the orbital calculations, and this drove him crazy. And so he was going to invest his own personal time at my mother's dining room table to solve the equation. And there were 7 kids. There was a lot going on. So I don't know exactly, but it seemed like it was 2 years. And he finally solved it. He was so excited. He called back, and they said, well, that's really interesting, but the fudge factor works just fine. He's like, wait a minute, we're NASA. We can't have a fudge factor in this. So years later, a young IT person was in Bermuda working a problem, and my dad and he got talking, and my father explained this irritant, and they finally decided to reprogram it and got rid of the fudge factor. But anyway, I tell the story because that had a huge impact on me as a little girl, who he was, the whole NASA program, what was going on in the world. I also grew up, Bermuda is, if you haven't been there, it's, I think it's heaven on earth. It's incredibly beautiful. So I had this great education, both with my family, the British school system, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to apply to schools in the US. Ladies, there was no internet, right? I got a bunch of brochures in the mail, and I'm looking through brochures and trying to figure out where to go, and we don't know whether my grades are really going to be acknowledged. So I think, and this was longhand essays, right? I applied to 12 universities, and then I got into every damn one, which was a good problem, but it was a problem. And the really cool thing was UVA was a state school, so it wasn't as expensive. I am the responsible oldest of 7, and understood that my dad was starting to really sweat bullets about the costs of all that schooling, because when you live overseas, you don't have a state school. So also, I was a tennis player. I was on scholarship, and UVA gave me enough of a scholarship. Tennis was just becoming a varsity sport because, when I was here, girls had just been admitted and the sports were just forming. So I said, I'll choose UVA. I'd never seen it. We drove down from Philadelphia, which is where my parents are from, And 20 minutes out of town, my grandmother convinced my mother to stop at some, I don't know, there was some antique fair or something. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm waiting to find where I'm going to spend the next 4 years. Well, anyway, I got here. I absolutely fell in love with it. I met my roommate and she said, are you really from Bermuda? Because we're going to be, if you are, we're going to become best friends and I'm coming home with you for spring break. I had dinner with her last night. She now lives in Charlottesville. Those things absolutely came to be. And the relationships, the experience I had here, the relationships I established, I never miss a reunion. And the pictures on the side is inside of it, that was the Spee House. It's, it lost everything after I was here. But we don't miss a reunion, and we have supported each other over the years in many different ways. And old friends, just even in those times when you can't invest that much time in them because you got 2 careers and kids and before cell phones. When you have time and reconnect, it's really special. So those of you who are thinking about, you're getting ready to move on, don't worry. Those relationships, what you learn here and how you learn to think and problem solve, that'll never lose you. And that should start you down the path of getting rid of this, or not getting rid of, but conquering that imposter syndrome. Because no matter what you're learning here, it's highly unlikely that you'll be working on the same problem, even in the short term. And I completely agree with the speaker earlier. 20 years from now, you'll be doing jobs that we can't even imagine. But what you're learning is how to problem solve, how to tackle it, take it apart, how to, if you don't know something, how to go find the person that knows. And be patient with yourself, especially those early on. The first couple of years of engineering can be pretty dry because you're building the foundations, right? So you're like building pieces of a puzzle, but you don't get to pull it together. And so it's really my experience, 3rd and 4th years when you get to start putting the puzzle pieces together, it becomes way more compelling. So if you've got those second year, and do I really want to spend my life doing this? Persevere through, because you can do anything with an engineering degree from UVA. A little bit just about family and fun, and then we'll get back into the career and how all happened. But I will preface this slide by saying there was a lot of angst. Oh God, when was that? The 90s. Can you really have it all? Absolutely, you can have it all. Me and many of my friends are evidence of that. When the lady from UT had a picture up, one of the pictures was one of my best friends from ExxonMobil, and I pinged her. I said, Sarah, I'm looking at your picture at UVA. And so there's a lot of women, and we went through some really tough times, but we have good marriages, we have kids, and my kids are now all grown. So I have 3 kids, but now I have 6 because they're all married, and I love the partners that my kids chose. And now I have 4 grandkids. And because I was very successful in my career, I can afford to take them anywhere and do anything. It is amazingly satisfying. Now, was it easy? Of course not. And again, the speakers, we didn't talk to each other, but we are all saying the same things. Anybody that tells you there was work-life balance, I don't know what planet they live on. It's a seesaw, and the seesaw is going like this. Like for me, most of the 40 years. And there are many times when the work is hard. It's like when you're studying for exams, right? You've got to really dig deep, and you sacrifice, and you might be sacrificing your personal health and wellness. The working women, we can talk a lot about that, but you can't do it forever or your health will suffer. And there are times when you have to tell the company there's something at home going on and I need to be there more. And then there are times when it's the other, and you have to kind of look at the career over the long term. And although technology has its downside, it's huge upside. My poor kids, I paid more late fees to daycare than you can ever imagine. I just could not get out, and there was always something, and I didn't have a computer. I was the first person in my division at Monsanto to get a computer in my home because I was in a tech service role for the car companies, and if there was a problem with the plastic part, you didn't want to let the manufacturing line shut down. It went all the way to the president. Monsanto for me to get a computer at home, and now you can't imagine not having that. I was also the first person to get a cell phone. I was the first person to have locks in my company car, power locks. So I heard through the grapevine that they were going to offer power locks in the company car because I was in a sales engineer role in Detroit. And at the time, Detroit was the murder capital of the country. And Highland Park, where Chrysler was, which was my account, was in the murder capital of Detroit. So I went into my boss, I had many, many wonderful bosses. This one was a jerk. And I went in and I said, it's time for me to order a new car. And I hear that they're going to be offering power locks. And for my own safety, I really, and he looked at me, he goes, well, what? Why would we be giving it to you? I'm sure it's the leader, the sales managers that we get in. My little Irish temper came out. And I said, look, I'm a pregnant lady working in the murder capital of the murder capital. If I don't, qualify for power locks, who on earth does? And he looked at me and he said, this is the problem having women in the workforce. So there are stories, especially the speakers, that could tell you it's just a different flavor of the same thing. And you have to, the point to some of this is you have to have you have to have a lot of resilience. You have to know who you are. You can't let others define what's okay and what's not okay. And weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Like you're going to be doing a lot of that. And the workforce has changed a lot. It's changed a lot for the better. But some things are even harder because they're so nuanced. It was easier for me to understand that I needed to stomp my little foot and say, this isn't okay. When during the downturn, I was talking earlier, I came out in 79, and by 81, 82, chemicals and oil and gas was just going in the toilet. And I actually had an HR person say, well, are you and Rick, are you really both going to take a job? Because that means some man won't be able to support his family. But that was overt, right? So you knew what you were dealing with, and it kind of got you past all this naive, raised by a dad who told me I could do anything, come to school in a lovely, wonderful place like this where they were really encouraging the few female engineers that we had. Not saying there weren't crazy actors, because there always are, but very, very positive, and you hit the real world, and then you're getting all these signals. And you have to go back to, who are you? What do you stand for? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, because otherwise you're not going to be able to be the big, wonderful you that you want to be. So, these pictures make me happy. I'm retired for the last year. I ran hard for almost 42 years, and I was flat exhausted, and I had absolutely no trouble transitioning to retirement. So the thumbnail and the dean went through it a little bit. So I started out in engineering roles, technical roles. I did startups, manufacturing, that stuff. But I had an inkling that I would be more compelled by the business things. And actually my faculty advisor here, Dr. Gaynor, who was just an awesome advisor, he got to know me quite well. The school was so small. We knew our professors really well. And I know that that's something that I hear from the students is still good at UVA, but size does matter. So he said to me one time, you might want to take the GMAT. I just have an inkling you're going to want to be the person that is making the decisions about how this chemistry and chemical engineering is getting used. And so I did. And so I still didn't know. And I know in the speed dating things we did, there were a lot of questions about that. So I decided to start my MBA at night just to figure out, was it interesting to me? Did it compel me? And I ended up just finishing taking at night. And I had a really good foundation in those individual contributor years in those engineering roles. And I was doing really well in a big, very demanding labor union environment in a plant in East St. Louis, Illinois, which is not a garden spot. And the company really liked me there. They wanted me to stay there because they'd never had any female supervisors. I was the first shift supervisor at that plant. But what I was discovering was that I was really bored. I was busy, but I was intellectually bored because of who I am. I am a problem solver, change agent. The worst thing that you could ever do for me, and I told a boss later as I started to understand myself, don't ever give me a job and say, this is running perfectly, don't screw it up. Because I'm a fiddler. I'm gonna find something I need to fix. It's who I am. And so I went in to my boss and I was really nervous. And his first reaction was, do you know how many people had to go to bat to get you this job to begin with? And you're laughing, you can imagine that conversation. And I just told him that I valued the experience, but it really wasn't what I wanted to do, and had to appropriately, gently but firmly help him understand that I wasn't threatening the company, but if they didn't move me, they were gonna lose me. And so they did. They moved me into a role where I got my first customer support in the technical world. That led me to the Detroit job. And then I was in this business that was brand new. It was brand new polymer. In fact, another Dr. Gaynor story, I came back for one of my reunions. I walked into his office and all our literature was all over his walls for Santoprene thermoplastic vulcanizate. And I said, oh my gosh, Dr. Gaynor, look at all this stuff. He goes, have you heard of this stuff? It's the best. I said, I wrote most of that technical literature. He said, your stuff is so good, it was an easy peasy for me to design the curriculum that I'm doing on this introduction to new polymer course. But it was fun. And we were gonna create this joint venture and be able to have that entrepreneurial, grow a business from nothing. I was like person number 12, I believe, in the business. Long story short, Exxon just sold that business for $1 billion to Celanese last year. And life is interesting. You know who the integration person is at Celanese for that business? My oldest son. So he was not under non-disclosure, and he knew they were looking at a potential acquisition. And he was actually in the boardroom, and somebody said the trade name, Santoprene, and he said, you better have me sign confidentiality because I sure know about that business. I grew up with it. So anyway, again, I raised my hand and I said, I want to go in the joint venture. Well, Monsanto didn't really want me to do that either, because by this time I'd gotten out of manufacturing, but now they thought, well, you could be a business leader here. And the harder they tried to convince me not to go into the joint venture, the more I knew that if it crashed and burned, which most joint ventures do, by the way, statistically, that they would take me back because they were actually telling me, that they appreciated me. There's a method in the madness of telling you stories, but anyhow, I went into the joint venture. It was 10 years of just explosive growth, fun, seeing the world, figuring out how business was done in different cultures, figuring out how to be a female leader. But when the Japan entity reported to me when I was 35 years old, like for them, that was a huge loss of face. So I had to understand the cultural dynamics. You're not going to change Japanese culture when you're a 36-year-old female manager from the States, but you do have to be sensitive to it, and think about how can I do things and be effective here without really slamming up against some things that are very, very closely held for them. So the joint venture had a great run, and Monsanto needed money, so they sold it to Exxon, and I landed in Exxon at age 42, and everybody, all my peers, and I knew some of them because we bought raw materials from them, and we'd done some networking, and they all told me that Exxon would never promote me because I was not raised by Exxon, and Exxon was a hire from within company, which it was, and that I was female. Yes, at age 42, I was still hearing that, and that I would just be a cog in the wheel. And I knew myself, and I said, oh my goodness, I cannot be a cog in the wheel. A change agent will, wither up and die if she's a cog in the wheel. So I gave myself 18 months to figure out if I was going to stay there, and that, I wrote down like what would it look like if I decide to stay here. And the number one thing was to make a difference, that there was, something different there because Margaret, was in the role. You may think that sounds, pretentious, but it was actually just understanding who I was and that I wouldn't be happy and therefore wouldn't be delivering much value if I did anything else. So the first role I got, so I'd been in this small but growing company, and the first role I got was head of marketing for the biggest plastics division of any corporation in the world. We made billions of dollars, and the job needed me because they were trying to commoditize too quickly, and I came from a specialty business, and so I was able to do some things pretty quickly that started throwing some money on the bottom line. But when I got the job, there were a couple of guys that I really liked who said, man, they must have really needed a woman in this job. You know, so again, that imposter wants to jump out and say, why did they give me the job? And luckily, I had a really good mentor, senior guy at the company, who's like, no, we need to learn from you. We didn't just buy the business. We bought the capability that you have and your global marketing reach. And you were the architect of global marketing at the joint venture. So I had to try to listen real hard to him and ignore those other voices. And then I went from there to vice president of marketing for the whole chemical company. And I was actually starting to think about retiring. My husband retired quite a bit before me. And then I got the call to come do a corporate job and overhaul all things talent at ExxonMobil. So who could turn down, a job like that? And we were in the dark ages. Everything was Word documents in folders. You would have a career discussion, and then it would go into into a paper folder somewhere. How much visibility do you think that had as decisions were being made? So I completely digitized all of that, got to go out and talk to universities about the learning space. One of our big challenges was trying to figure out the quality of the engineering schools in China and India and other places where we were hiring that we hadn't hired before. So, just a fabulous set of experiences. And all along, there were too many first woman to roles to count. I didn't look up and see any ladies until later on in my career. And one of them's picture was up with Sarah Rush earlier. So this is a page where I'm going to spend a fair amount of time and ignore the picture and the brand part to begin with. But when you think about your careers, and a lot of people write about this and talk about it, so there's not just one place I have to point, you really always got learning, earning, and returning going on, but they are the patterns and what you focus on is very different. I agree with everything everybody said. Learning is a constant, it's forever. But there's no more important time for the learning than the first third of your career. Earnings it's like an S curve, and they accelerate later if you do a really good job of building a foundation, learning about the company you're in, taking different jobs, doing things you might not think you want to do, you might not be interested in doing. And when you're doing the learning, you're building capability, you're building credibility, you're building the wherewithal to knock that imposter syndrome in the head. And those words were in my talk before I heard you talk, by the way. But it's really important. And I see way too many young people who focus way too early on the earning thing. And the fact is, you guys that are going into the market soon, this is an inflationary period. I don't want to be a downer, but you're going to barely stay ahead from an absolute salary standpoint from the kids coming up behind you. It's reality. Now, you're still building wealth. You're paying off debts. You're buying your first car, house, whatever. So you are better off, even if your salary doesn't go up a lot, if you do it for 10 years. But you're not going to be earning 2 or 3 times what people around you do. If you build a really strong foundation in the beginning of your career, the odds or the potential for you to really drive that earnings power in the middle of your career goes way up. Just don't be in too much of a hurry to get there. And you're not only learning the hard stuff, you're learning the soft stuff. So I want to really encourage you to think about the difference between how we learn in school. Like, there's a syllabus. We know there's a test. If we have a great professor, we have a really good idea what the test is going to be on. Then you land at a company. So what are the milestones? How do you, there isn't a grade. What is it that you need to learn? And as engineers, we have a tendency to gravitate to, I'm going to learn about the technical thing. I'm going to learn about this polymer that we're making. And if I'm really smart, I'm going to go talk to the guy in the corner of the room that nobody pays attention to anymore, that has forgotten more than you'll ever learn. And even though he bores me to tears, I'm going to sit down there and I'm going to ask him questions. Because you got to learn from everybody. But then the other thing I want you to ask questions about is, how does it all work? How are decisions made? What does the full, you have me doing this, and a lot of bosses tend to over-prescribe what their early engineers are doing. And you got to do that, right? But then you want to ask him what the big picture looks like. So if you're in a project role, what's the gate system look like? When are decisions made? How are decisions made? Because you want to understand your piece of the puzzle and how it fits into the bigger thing. You want to ask people what the unwritten rules are. They'll tell you if you ask them. They forget what they didn't know when they walked in the door. And people love to help. You will have so many more people who are willing to answer your questions than you can imagine. And they don't think it's a waste of your time. I mean, I mentored almost every lunch for the last 20 years of my career. That's what I did with my lunch. And my admin knew it, and she helped organize it. And some of it was formal, and some of it was informal. And it gave me a little energy boost in the middle of the day, because I got to think about what somebody else was doing. It took me away from whatever I was preoccupied with. So learn, build that capability, and learn what you like and learn what you don't like. And there is no such word as failure. I never failed in my career, but I had more setbacks than you can imagine. And that's really honestly how I looked at them. Now I'm naturally a very positive, glasses half full of person, but I know, I don't know, I think I talked to a lot of you about it. One of my big setbacks that just really yanked my chain, because I knew I was right. I had a boss who didn't believe the internet was ever going to be a business tool. And I was the head of marketing. And I kept going in, and I tried to, figure out under, over, around, through, whatever you put. And he actually had to retire before I could really do what I wanted to do. But in the meantime, I did have a budget, so I bought up all the domain names, and I was doing all kinds of work so that when I finally got the freedom to move, I could explode out of the gates. And many other similar stories over the years. And in corporate America, sometimes it's just not the right time. Sometimes a corporation has something else that's more important going on than your pet project. And while the project could absolutely be the right thing, maybe the answer is not now. But you have to be fearless. And if you really believe in it, you have to go for it. So if you'll spare me one more story, but it's in an interesting space. I was running the biggest plastics business in the world when the world started getting a lot more tuned into sustainability and plastics waste. And there was more ignorance than science being talked about, and companies were going to eliminate all plastics in 5 years. Companies like Walmart, how can you ship all that stuff around the world economically if you don't use plastic? You really want to pay the fuel costs and the impact on your environment if you put it all back in glass? Paper, cardboard, there's a lot of deficits. So it just, depends what problem it is you're trying to solve. So we didn't have a articulate answer or speaking points or things that we were allowed to say about this whole sustainability thing. And I said, well, we got to do something about it. So I figured out, because again, I was relatively new to ExxonMobil, how do you do it? Who has to approve it? Who do I have to talk to? Public affairs, all this stuff. And I was all ready to go. And we were going to train our salespeople, and we were going to talk about science and the balance you need in the sustainability space. And I almost missed it, but there was a snail mail email that got sent out from the upstream, from the oil and gas side of the business, that because there was so much confusion on the meaning of the word sustainability, and this was a bit of a classic response from ExxonMobil back in the time, we were not going to use the word. which was all over the website I was about to get out. And so sometimes you have to have a lucky leprechaun on your shoulder. I'm sadly walking through the corridor, and I saw the president of a chemical company. He said, "How are you today?" And I said, "Not very well." He said, "Margaret's not very well. What's going on?" I said, "I just got a note that says da 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 da." He was not aware of what I was working on. It was a huge company. He goes, "Ooh, you better come back to my office." So to make a long story short, the only person who outranked the person who had said this was Rex Tillerson, who was our chairman at the time, the guy who became Secretary of State for a short period of time. And he was coming to town. And so this president said, "You want to put your case to Rex?" And I said, "Yes." And I went back and I told my boss, he said, you're doing what? Because people perceived that was a big risk I was taking. And if I'd handled it the wrong way, the reality is it could have been, but it was too important for him not to hear from me and to get a chance to think about, should we do something different? And I got some really wonderful advice from a guy who had been my boss, because I called him, like, everybody thinks I'm crazy, but this is what I'm doing. And he chuckled. And he said, "Well, Margaret, first of all, I want you to stay in your chair." I said, "Stay in my chair." "Say more." He said, "You're looking at this through the lens of the marketing leader for the polyethylene business, and you have a legitimate need to be able to talk scientifically with your customers about the sustainability space. Just stay in that chair. Don't come across to Rex, who's got, he was negotiating, for oil and gas personally with Russians at the time, right? Help him understand that you understand you might be told no, and that would be okay because other people have a broader point of view than you." And it really helped me because I went in there in a very humble way, not my usual fiery, passionate, we're going to do this, right, Margaret? And I had met him. I had an opportunity to present it to him the past, and he was very grumpy with what was going on in the industry. But he listened, and at the end of the presentation, he said, "I want you to proceed. I want you to be cautious, and I want you to tell us what you learned." And I mean, that was a huge win. I would not have gone in with the right tone. First of all, if I'd believed some people, I wouldn't have even tried. I would have said, "The corporation spoke, and Margaret, find something else to try to do." And but I went in with sort of understanding that you can't possibly see everything that's going on. My worry was that sustainability is, it's a really tough topic with oil and gas. And how could I just talk about the plastic end of it? So I ended up actually, the way ExxonMobil did things, if you had something that was an issue of concern, they assigned issue owners for the corporation. And so I ended up being the issue owner for sustainability, and it followed me through several jobs. It was like nobody else wanted to do that. But it was really interesting space, and there was a lot going on with government. I was chairing the plastics division of the American Chemistry Council and working with the government there. And if I hadn't been a bit fearless, I never would have done it. Now, would ExxonMobil have addressed sustainability? Of course they would have. Somebody would have come behind me and somebody else would have done something. But because I was there, I had a point of view, I shared it respectfully, and I was able to get something done. But I can't tell you how scary it was, even though I was a really successful business person at that point. And I learned more about sustainability in 6 months than, Google was my friend, but I also called all kinds of people. I found somebody at UVA who'd ended up getting really involved in it because it really wasn't in my lane at all until I started to do that. I talked a little and hopefully enough about the earning piece. And what I like to think about on the earning is that you're really delivering value. And that's really when you start to accelerate your earnings power, you're delivering value and making a difference. And that's whether you're in a business, a university, whatever you're doing, it is making a big enough difference that you get compensated. And then the third part of the wheel, which has always been important to me, is the returning. And when you return, you're enabling others, whether it's inside the company, working with girls in engineering, working with a nonprofit, you're helping people be more able to realize their own dreams. I want to give you a little caution here as well, because you don't have unlimited time. So I overprescribed early, and then I had 3 young kids, and that balancing act was more out of balance than it ever did. And I had to make a decision for a couple of years only to do the volunteer things that were like part of a normal work day. So introduce a girl to engineering day, that was on a work day, right? So I could volunteer for that. And I could run a United Way campaign or whatever, but I pulled back from some of the outside boards. I pulled back from some of the volunteering with the schools because I had to realize that there's only so much Margaret to go around. Now, when your kids are little, they need you a lot. When they're teenagers, they only want you for money. But the time constraints are different, right? So you don't worry, let it go. Let it go if work goes crazy on you. Let it go during those early kid years, because you'll have plenty of time later on to return in so many different ways. So again, no matter your career, it's about learning, earning, and returning, but just make sure that those 3 are at the right rate and pace and intensity for the stage of the career that you're at, because it's a long career. It's a long career. And back to that work-life balance thing, and one of the advantages that I had, because I was essentially with the same employer, it sort of changed form for me, but there was a lot of money in the credibility piggy bank. So when I had things in my personal life that had to take me away, I donated a kidney to my brother, which was a significant outage from the workforce. And that would have been very difficult to do if I was like with a company for a year, because you're out for months and you're not really that effective for longer than that, even dealing with the whole thing. But when you've been around and you've invested in people trust and respect you, it is so much easier to then get the grace and the ease to do things. And so corporate America has changed a lot. It's changed a lot for the better, but they are still running a corporation, right? So you want to be able to build that credibility and then have that long-term career view. And we had a lot of conversations when I was coming up because, maternity leaves, family leaves, was more a women thing. Now it's awesome. A lot of the men are taking leave when they have kids. I think that's wonderful. But there would be more talk about women being gone than guys having back surgery. Let me tell you, there are a lot of men with the big old bellies at ExxonMobil that ended up needing back surgery. Well, that seemed to be okay, but being gone forever, dealing with a child was not. And all of that has just improved so much over the years. But you have to be able to articulate what you need, make it be fair. Talk to your boss, like, okay, I know this is a tough time, but I have this need here. How can we work it out? And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, people will work with you because they want you to succeed. They especially want you to succeed if they've been someone that's really supported your career. And when you're in a dual career demanding world, anybody that tells you there's never stress in the marriage, again, is not being candid with you. There will be. There will be those moments. I laugh because one of my kids, they are 100%, we are taking turns. And I was just talking to them. I said, so do you ever say, okay, I know it's my turn, but I really, really would rather switch turns with you because I've got something crazy at work? And they're both engineers, and they looked at me and go, nope, we take turns. Now they're still early in the game. We'll see if they do that. Rick and I tried to balance it over time, like who would be the one to run to daycare when they called and said the kid had a fever. But we weren't anal about like every other time. But again, you'll find out whatever works for you. You have to communicate really well, and it's worth it. But it's not, it's not completely smooth sailing all the way along, and it's tough. So when I was making the transition from the individual roles to the leadership roles, I had an easier time than many because, unlike a lot of engineers, I actually hate the details. I want to solve the problem like in a high level way, and I want somebody else to do it. So it was really hard for me early in the career, but then when I got to a certain level and I had people working for me, it worked out much better for me. But you have to have the discipline to do it and to do those hard jobs early on. And so I'm going to talk about this picture, if you can read it a little bit, because it was really cool. So I helped start many of the employee resource groups at ExxonMobil, and women had actually a critical mass by the time I got through. So then we helped the Black organization, the Asian organization, the Pride, which was the LGBTQ one. And so because we had more senior ladies than any of those groups had senior anybody. And so they asked me to do this talk, and unbeknownst to me, they sent out a survey to hundreds of people that had worked with me and for me and made this word cloud. And then I was actually going into headquarters, and they didn't even tell me about them. So I walk in and I see this poster and I see my picture, and then I see all these words. And it's just a normal word cloud. It's actually the size, not the density of the numbers. And it was one of the coolest returning things to me that I got out of a group that I was helping with. And the words up there, it may not scream engineering, but it sure was a wonderful feeling about what people felt about my leadership. And the things that meant the most to me was the listening, because early in my career, I did not get gold stars for listening. I was listening more than people realized I was, but I tended to, quickly form an idea from what I heard and move and not acknowledge that, yes, I was listening to you, and it's now embedded in the problem that I'm trying to do with this deal. And as you make that transition and you think about the type of leader that you want to be, and you may have a leadership role really early. That's getting earlier and earlier in career, which I think is a really good thing. Take a minute and write down, what is it that you would like people to say about you? And think about what it would take to do that. And I'd be very upset if things like ethical didn't come through, but it's nice to see it in big words. Genuine, that authentic leadership. I don't have to fake to care about the people that were on my team. I care about people. Fascinate me. Like, I want to know their story. The other thing that was really advantageous to me, because I did love, especially to be connected to the young people in the organization, was when we came through work, and a couple of other speakers have mentioned this, like there was no computer, there was no internet, there was everything about how we work changed during our careers. And we have peers who did not get on board the digital train and never wanted to be able to do their own PowerPoint. That was the secretary's job back in the day, right? Because we weren't digital natives. So the fact that I was always in all the jobs I had, even when I had groups of thousands, I was deliberately doing little mini sessions with the young employees and hearing from them. And it always influenced me way more than they thought that it would. And I don't know, none of us are smart enough to know what that it is that's going to really revolutionize your worlds. Because big data is already here. It hasn't fully shown what it's going to do, but it's going to do lots of things, right? But there's something else that's out there that we don't even know what it is yet. And it is the young people that are going to have a pretty important window to that. And also, I moved away from technical, but I was still reading technical stuff. I still do now as a retiree. Like, Bitcoin fascinated me. What the heck's a blockchain? So you have to keep that curiosity going, even if you're in a role where you don't have to be an expert at it. And it'll be a while till you're in a role like me, but part of why I want to tell you that is the right people where you go next they actually really, really do want to hear from you. And when they give you the chance, walk through that door. If there's a place you can sign up for a lunch with somebody, do it and be your curious self. Ask them challenging questions. We get tired of answering the easy questions. So I think usually by the time I get to the end, I've said everything. Closing thoughts, keep learning. I think I said that a few times. Apply your problem-solving skills to all aspects of life. If anybody's going to figure out how to do this juggling act, it's an engineer. I promise you, right? So there's lots of things you need to try to figure out. I'll give you a few clues. The kids don't care if you buy the stuff you're supposed to cook for school and put it in your own container. They do not. And it takes a lot less time. And if you're an engineer from the University of Virginia, you can afford to do that. So whether it's how to be the mom that has to send cookies to school, figure it out. Find another mom to take them to practice. I was one of 7 kids. We had no expectation that my parents would be at practice, and I never introduced that expectation to my children. I also saw working ladies that were doing their husband's laundry. I'm like, what did he do before you got married? Does he not know how to use a washing machine? And one time, my 11-year-old had a little hissy fit about his favorite jeans being dirty, and I said, hey, have I got a cool machine to show you how to do it? And then I had my kids do their laundry from then on. I'm like, why not? I didn't have them do their sheets, or they never would have cleaned them. But their favorite clothes, they actually did, and they all thanked me later when they got to college. Like, we know how to do stuff. Seek and listen to advice, but you got to filter it. There are a lot of people that are going to tell you, hopefully well-intentioned things, but they don't apply to you, or they only apply to you a little bit. So don't go into like a mentor lunch and sit down and say, tell me what to do. Okay? So filter it, own it. You have to own your career journey. It's your career. Only you can decide like what you want to do, how you want to make a difference. But we spend a lot of time at work. And if you don't love what you're doing, change it. Don't leave the company immediately. First, figure out if you could change there, if you like the company. I mean, if you don't like the company, take off. Be fearless. If you really believe in something, you believe it's the right thing, have the gumption to go in there and advocate and realize you're not going to always win that battle. I think you'll win most of the wars. And have fun. Have fun in all aspects of your life. Take time for fun with your colleagues. Establish those relationships. Keep in touch with your UVA friends. You can't imagine what treasures they'll be over the years. So those are my thoughts. I know it's been a long day, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any left at this stage. There's one over there.
I can talk loud.
Okay, that's fine. I can hear you.
Good. It's for the
Oh, it's for the live stream.
Okay. So I liked how practical your talk was. I really appreciated that, first off. But the part where you described that risk-taking that you did, I was like on the edge of my seat for that. Because, you did a good job telling it. But so when it comes to risk-taking and like taking risks for your own career and your own, like there's so much on the line there. So my question is, how do you perform that calculus to assess the personal risk to yourself while still honoring and accepting that no might be the answer, like you said, and also like you said that other people might have a wider perspective that I'm not considering, because I have lots of ideas, but a lot of them are very bad because I don't know all the information.
Well, they're not bad, right? They just may not compete for time today. And so first of all, with me, it's how passionate am I about this? For me, if I'm really, really passionate about something, it's because I absolutely believe that it's important. And usually the first thing I know is that I'm passionate. And then I have to sit down and say, why? What's driving it? How urgent is it? Okay, so another thing I often talk about, there's important things, there's urgent things. Things that are important and urgent have to go right to the top of your box. but really do, sometimes you just need to give yourself a chill pill and say, is it urgent? Because if it's not urgent, go out and build consensus. Invest the time to talk to other people who are going to have a voice in terms of what you want to do, because you probably will have a sense whether something is going to meet a lot of resistance or not if you know the world you're operating in. And so if it's really important and it's not incredibly urgent, invest that time in building that consensus, because you'll also get different perspectives. The other thing I always have to do, because I'm an optimist, I always had to have a huge pessimist on my team. And I'm sorry I used the word his, but that was my reality. Designated role was to make sure he told me everything that could go wrong. And there I'm thinking of one guy who worked for me a lot, and we would all joke about it. And I would look at him and he would know, okay, she needs me to tell her what I think could go wrong, because then we could figure out how to mitigate it. So for me, getting to that understanding that my positive me and absolutely convinced that I could figure out how to do this gave me a blind spot. And then how do I fill in the blind spot? So yeah, just figure out how important it is to you, and then figure out how urgent it is, and figure out a way to make it happen in the environment that you're in. Thank you.